With all the new and returning tanks, I think most people won't know 100% what most characters do, especially the newer or changed tanks like Doomfist and Junker Queen. So in this video we'll briefly go over and discuss what each of the tanks do, their strengths and weaknesses, as well as how best to play them. But before we get into the video, let me just say if you enjoyed it or learned something new, why not leave a like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything and helps my channel grow. But let's get back right into the video. Let's go through each character in alphabetical order, starting with Diva. Diva is a very flexible and highly mobile tank. She is great at getting to power positions on the map and is a threat to most targets if up close and personal. Let's start with her passive. Whenever Diva's mech reaches 0 health, she ejects out and has to play just with her pistol and a very small amount of health. Her ultimate when in this form is to call back her mech with full health. Her weapons are the fusion cannons. These are fully automatic shotguns with some decent mid-range damage but deadly close range damage. Her secondary fire is Defense Matrix, and when activated it will block all projectiles or bullets within 10 meters of where Diva is facing. This ability uses a charge meter and will regenerate when not being used. Her first ability is Boosters. When activated she will fly forwards in whatever direction she is looking. Her second ability is Micro Missiles. When activated, Diva will send out a volley of missiles which deal damage. This can be used alongside with either a shotguns or a defense matrix. Her ultimate is Self-Destruct. When activated, Diva will eject from a mech before it starts the self-destruct sequence, which will deal colossal damage to any enemy that is caught near it when it blows up. Diva will also immediately gain her ultimate while in the pilot form, allowing her to immediately re-mech. Overall, Diva doesn't have a lot of weaknesses as she is very good at a lot of things, but she is best at peeling for her team and keeping them alive from dives and flanks, as she can quickly fly to them and use defense matrix to prevent them from taking damage. Her biggest weakness is beam weapons, like Zarya, Symmetra and Echo, as defense matrix does not stop beam weapons. The next tank is Doomfist. Doomfist again is a highly mobile tank, but he specializes in being extremely aggressive and initiating fights while providing no protection to his team. Doomfist's passive grants him 30 temporary shields for every enemy he hits with each ability. Doomfist's primary fire is his hand cannon, which is a short-range shotgun that holds up to 4 charges. His secondary fire is Rocket Punch. After a short channel, Doomfist lunges forwards and knocks back any enemy hit by his punch. If a knocked back enemy hits a wall, they will receive more damage and a slight stun. His first ability is a leap followed by an AoE slam. When activated, Doomfist will launch himself in the direction he is facing and will then land with a shock in front of him, which briefly CCs enemies. You can also cancel this ability early and keep all of your momentum. His secondary ability is Power Block. When activated, Doomfist will hold up his gauntlet and take significantly less damage. If he takes at least 90 damage, he will instantly get Rocket Punch off of cooldown and his next punch will be enhanced, moving further and faster, dealing more damage and knockback. Finally, Doomfist's ultimate is Meteor Strike. When activated, Doomfist will fly into the sky and then land at a targeted area. This does a lot of damage at the center and less around the sides. Overall, Doomfist is incredibly mobile, but it takes a lot of practice and experience to stay mobile enough to be able to engage, survive and escape. Next up is Junker Queen, the newest tank to be added into Overwatch. Her passive is to heal from all the damage applied from her bleeding, which is applied by her abilities. Her primary fire, yet again, is another shotgun. Not much to say there. Her secondary fire throws out a knife. She can then recast the ability to have the knife fly back to her. If you are hit by the knife, she will also pull you a short distance towards her. This knife also applies the bleeding effect to anyone it hits, as well as anyone it travels through on the way back to Junker Queen. Also, if she's holding her knife, her quick melee will also apply the bleed effect. Her first ability is Commanding Shout. When activated, she increases her health and move speed. Her allies also gain this effect, however they gain less health. Her second ability is Carnage. When activated, Junker Queen swings her axe, dealing massive damage and applying bleed to anyone hit. Her ultimate is Rampage. When activated, Junker Queen will launch herself in the direction she is facing. She damages as well as applies anti-heal and bleed to anyone hit by it. Junker Queen is an incredibly lethal tank that deals a lot of damage while refusing to die. She, however, does not have good mobility and can really struggle on maps with a lot of high ground or long sightlines. Next up is Orisa. Orisa is an aggressive juggernaut of a tank that specialises in bullying people away. Her primary fire is actually not a shotgun. It's a fully automatic projectile weapon with infinite ammo that utilises a heat mechanic. If you reach max heat, you will have to stop shooting. Her secondary fire is Energy Javelin. When activated, Orisa will throw a javelin. If it hits an enemy, it will knock them back. If the knockback enemy hits a wall, it will stun for longer and deal extra damage. Her first ability is Fortify. When activated, Orisa gains overhealth, damage resistance, and immunity to crowd control effects. Her second ability is Javelin Spin. When activated, Orisa will spin her javelin in front of her. This provides her with a speed boost as well as blocking all damage from non-beam weapons. If she collides with an enemy, they take damage and are picked up by Orisa as she charges forward. Finally, her ultimate is Terra Surge. When activated, Orisa groups up all enemies that were around her onto her body as she fortifies and begins charging up a massive AoE attack. Overall, Orisa is great at pushing through enemies and being the front line on flat maps, but she lacks any vertical mobility and utility out of close quarters and generally can fall flat. Next up is probably the most iconic tank in Overwatch, Reinhardt. He's a massive frontline tank who bullies people away. His primary fire is a massive hammer. He swings his hammer and it deals a lot of damage. His secondary fire is his shield. When activated, he will hold out his shield in the direction he is facing. This shield will regenerate its health while it is not being utilized. His first ability is Charge. When activated, Reinhardt will charge forward. If he makes direct contact with an enemy, he will pick them up and take them along with him. If he then makes contact with a wall or a structure, the enemy will take massive damage. He can control and cancel this ability at any time during its usage. His second ability is Fire Strike. When activated, Reinhardt will throw out a projectile that damages and pierces enemies. Finally, his ultimate is Earth Shatter. When activated, Reinhardt will slam down his hammer into the ground, knocking down all enemy players in front of him. This will also deal massive damage if anyone is right in front of him when he activates it. Overall, Reinhardt is a great tank at leading the way and taking close range fights. He offers protection and aggression, but again, he's a tank that lacks vertical mobility, making him great on flat maps, but almost useless on maps that have a lot of high ground. Next up is Roadhog. Roadhog is more of a beefy damage dealer than any type of tank, and is an extremely feast or famine character. His primary fire is Scrap Cannon, and surprise surprise, it's another shotgun, this time just with massive spread and a lot of pellets. His secondary is a projectile that travels a short distance before exploding into the shotgun shot identical to his primary fire. His first ability is to take a breather. When activated, he takes a breath out of his canister thing, and I actually don't know what it is, and neither does the wiki. But over the course of the ability, Roadhog will restore half his max health and have 50% damage reduction. Roadhog's second ability is his hook. When activated, Roadhog will throw out his hook. If this hits an enemy, they will be stunned and pulled right in front of Roadhog where he can swiftly eliminate them. Last up is Roadhog's ultimate, Whole Hog. When activated, Roadhog will transform his weapon and will be able to unleash massive amounts of scrap, dealing damage and knocking back to anyone who gets hit by the massive horizontal spread. He can choose to stop shooting or use any other ability while in the ultimate, which is a big change from Overwatch 1. Overall, Roadhog is only as good as your ability to keep hitting hooks and getting kills. Without that, he provides nothing useful to your team. Also, not to mention, he has no mobility and no way to help out his team. Okay, next up is Sigma. Sigma is probably the best anchor tank with the most consistent mid-range damage and pressure, but he can struggle up at close range. His primary fire are his hyperspheres. These are two small projectiles that bounce off walls until they reach their max range or hit an enemy before exploding. His secondary fire is his barrier. When activated, he will summon his barrier out in front of him. By holding down this ability, he will continue to send out his barrier until the button is released. You can put the shield away by recasting the shield. It will regen its health while it has been put away. His first ability is Kinetic Grasp. When activated, Sigma absorbs all non-beam weapon attacks, and once the ability is over, he gains a shield based on how much damage he absorbed. His second ability is Accretion. Sigma throws a big ass rock that knocks enemies down if it hits them. Finally, Sigma's ultimate is Graphitic Flux. Sigma gains the ability to fly into the air and target an area on the ground. Any enemy in the targeted area will be lifted into the air before being slammed into the ground, dealing half of their maximum health as damage. Overall, Sigma is just a great tank at holding a position and just throwing out constant AoE damage. He can really struggle when enemies get up close and personal, but apart from that is great at keeping everything together. Next up is Winston. Winston is a highly mobile, flexible tank that specializes in diving and controlling high grounds. His primary fire is his Tesla cannon. He shoots out electricity that deals damage to any enemies within a short cone in front of him. His secondary fire is to charge up a long-range jolt of electricity. This really doesn't deal much damage, but is a great way to poke and harass people. His first ability is Barrier Projector. When activated, Winston will drop a dome shield for him and his allies. His second ability is Jump Pack. When activated, Winston will leap into the targeted direction. When he lands, he will deal some damage and provide a small knockback. Finally, his ultimate is Primal Rage. When activated, Winston immediately gains 1000 health and becomes enraged. While in Primal Range, Winston can swing his fists around, applying heavy knockback, and his Jump Pack cooldown is drastically decreased. Overall, I think Winston is one of the best tanks in Overwatch 2, as he's mobile enough to keep pace and force fights, while still having a lot of tanking abilities to set up for his team. Onto our second last character in the tank category, which is Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is probably the hardest tank in the game to utilize to his fullest, as he has a lot of niche tech coupled with a unique playstyle. It's probably best to start with Wrecking Ball's first ability, which is Roll. When activated, Wrecking Ball will transform into a ball, increasing his movement and preventing him from shooting. Reactivating this ability will transform Wrecking Ball back into his non-ball form. Okay, onto his primary fire, which are his quad cannons. These quad cannons are just effectively short to medium range fully automatic weapons with light spread and medium damage. Wrecking Ball's secondary fire is his Grappling Claw. When activated, he sends out a grapple right where he was looking. He can then use his grapple to swing around and gain momentum speed. The grapple will end whenever the ability is let go of, or after a long enough time. If Wrecking Ball gains enough speed, making contact with an enemy will deal some damage and knock them back. Wrecking Ball's second ability is Adaptive Shields. When activated, Wrecking Ball will gain shields based on how many enemies are nearby. The more enemies, the more of a shield. Onto Wrecking Ball's third ability, Pile Driver. While in ball form, and at least more than 2.25 meters above the ground, Hammond can activate this ability to slam into the ground, knocking up nearby enemies while also dealing damage. Finally, onto Wrecking Ball's ultimate, Minefield. When activated, Wrecking Ball will create a minefield originating from when it was activated. These mines were spread out more based on what height they were summoned from, the higher, the more spread out. Overall, Wrecking Ball is again another incredibly mobile tank, but he doesn't really provide any tanking or utility for his team, and relies purely on disrupting and CCing the enemy team to get value. Finally, we come to Zarya. Zarya is a tank with incredibly high damage output potential, and is great at protecting teammates and herself from burst damage and negative effects. Let's start by talking about her passive. Her passive is Energy. Whenever one of her shields takes damage, it will generate energy for Zarya. This energy increases damage dealt by her weapon and has a max of 100. Her primary fire is a short-range beam. This deals very little damage at zero charge, but is incredibly deadly when at high energy. Her secondary fire is to shoot out an arcing projectile that explodes on contact with an enemy or terrain. This is the same with her primary fire in the sense that it deals very little damage at low charge and a lot at high energy. Her first ability is Particle Barrier. This is the shield that she gives to herself. And her second ability is Projected Barrier, which is the shield she gives to allies. These shields share the same cooldown and can store up to 2 charges. Finally, we have her ultimate, which is Graviton Surge. When activated, Zarya will lob out a gravity bomb that is effectively a black hole. It groups up all nearby enemies and keeps them there for a short time. Overall, Zarya is an incredibly solid tank with the option to either play entirely for yourself or play around your team via the use of your bubbles. However, if she can't get or sustain a high amount of energy, a lot of her damage falls off and so does her pressure in that game. That's every character from the tank roster at the time of the launch of Overwatch 2, and I can't wait to add new characters to the list as we move forward. But yeah, this video is actually much longer than I thought it would be before I actually started working on it, so I don't know what I'll do for DPS characters. I might have to split that into 2 different videos, but that's even if I want to try and do this video again. So we'll burn that bridge once we get to it. But yeah, thank you for getting this far into the video, and if you haven't already, why not leave a like and subscribe. I actually plan on making more content now this game has content to make for it. But till next, see you then.
My phone lights up, but it's never you. I can't help but feel so